All right, let's talk about the cases first. We've seen less than 3 lakh daily cases for a second day in a row. So the trend is continuing downwards. That's a good trajectory. So 2,63,000 cases recorded yesterday. Important to also note that daily deaths continue to be over the 4,000 mark. The total active caseload in the country has also fallen fairly dramatically in the past few days. It's still elevated, but it has fallen from 37 lakhs to around 33.5 lakh cases. Let me just quickly take you, before we get to our big story, to some of the important things that were said today in the Health Ministry briefing. Number one, it was mentioned clearly that about 2% of the population has already got COVID-19. That means 98% are still susceptible. And we're very close to beginning trials for vaccinations for children. Listen in.
जो कोवैक्सीन है हमारा वैक्सीन, उसको परमिशन दी गई है कि वो बच्चों में आप ट्रायल आगे लेके जाएं। उस वैक्सीन के अभी ट्रायल जो है वो 18 से ऊपर का हुआ है, इसलिए वो रिकमेंडेशन 18 के ऊपर की है, लेकिन बच्चों में ये इस्तेमाल हो और उसमें क्या रिस्पांस है उसका भी उनको ट्रायल की परमिशन मिली है। और वो काम मुझे बताया गया है कि अगले 10-12 दिन में ये काम भी शुरू हो रहा है। तो उस तरफ भी बढ़ रहे हैं। बाहर भी 1-2 जो बाहर के वैक्सीन बने हैं वो बच्चों पे अभी टेस्ट होने शुरू हुए हैं। तो इसके ऊपर साइंस की नज़र है, लेकिन जैसे मैंने कहा कि ये लेके चले कि बच्चों को भी एसिम्प्टोमेटिक इन्फेक्शन होती है, बच्चे भी स्प्रेड करते हैं, खासकर जहाँ तक डेटा दिखाता है 10 साल की उम्र तक। और बच्चों में एसिम्प्टोमेटिक है तो पता ही नहीं चलता, अगर हो तो सेल्फ प्रोटेक्शन के अलावा जो होम केयर के प्रिंसिपल्स बार बार हाईलाइट करते हैं उन पे भी लागू होते हैं। और अगर सिग्निफिकेंट डिजीज है तो उसको हमें प्रोटोकॉल के द्वारा हमें उसके ऊपर वॉच रखनी है। और ये प्रोटोकॉल एक्सपर्ट्स ने बनाया, एक्सपर्ट्स ने इसको अपनाया और हमें इसके बारे में तैयारी और इसकी जो ट्रीटमेंट्स हैं उसके बारे में रीजनेबल क्लैरिटी है।
Key decisions based on, for example, what the gap will be between 2 doses of Covishield, whether plasma should be used or not, on things like, when you should get your vaccination after getting COVID-19, are decided on the basis of advice from group of experts. Today, we have 2 top experts, both belonging to 2 groups which the government of India relies on for their data and for their inputs. So I'm joined today by Dr. N.K Arora, who's the chair of the COVID subcommittee at NTAGI, which is the National Technical Advisory Group on Immunization, and Professor Y.K Gupta, who's a member of the NEGVAC, which is essentially the National Expert Group on Vaccination Administration for COVID-19. So to put it simply, these are the people who decide what India's vaccination policy is and advise the government on how to go ahead. We've called them today to discuss some developments and recommendations which have come to light in the last few days and give us clarity on that. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. Dr. Arora, let me begin by asking you about the recommendation that has been reported today that people should get the COVID-19 vaccine up to 9 months after they've been tested COVID positive. So the gap is recommended to be increased to 6 to 9 months. Now, why has this recommendation been made, and does it concern you that a lot of people are reporting reinfection in a shorter time, sometimes as short as 2 to 3 months?
So thank you very much for inviting. I think this news which is circulating since morning, I would like to say that final decision on this has yet to be taken, whether it is going to be 3 months, 6 months or 9 months. So there is no clear-cut decision, one. The two is, you are right that the decision has to be driven by scientific evidence that when a person starts getting probability of a reinfection by itself is rare or uncommon, but if at all, if it occurs, we would not like people unnecessarily to be exposed, and before they become susceptible, vaccine should be given. but a final decision on this issue is yet to be finalized in next 1 or 2 days. And but I can assure you that it will be based strictly on science, and we are looking at data, both international as well as the available national data also.
So, Dr. Arora, what is the basis of the recommendation? I understand that the final decision is yet to be taken. This is merely at a recommendation stage. But what is the basis of this recommendation, and to extend it to this extent? I'm simply trying to understand if that recommendation is also in part driven by the shortage of vaccinations right now.
That is an excellent question. The recommendation will be driven by the susceptibility for reinfection after a proved COVID infection or a symptomatic, because there are a huge number of asymptomatic people, and there is no effort to test for all asymptomatically infected individuals and then take this decision. It is only for those who had recent test-proved, laboratory-proven symptomatic infection. One. The second is basis, as I'm repeatedly saying, that it is the probability of reinfection. As soon as the probability of reinfection increases beyond a certain limit, then you say, no, we will not expose because the person is becoming susceptible. Third thing which you said, vaccine shortage. Now, this is a vaccine sparing strategy. This will continue even when we have 30 crore doses available. The reason is that once you are affected, you do not need vaccine for a certain period of time. And when after that, when you get the vaccine acts as a very good booster for your immunity. So there is a science, and people across the globe are following it. And so, as you rightly said, it is not just for today. It is on a long-term basis, and in the overall interest that when the vaccine is given after a COVID infection, it really works as a good booster for the individual. So, but as you rightly said, it is a vaccine sparing strategy. It will certainly spare up some, but the number of cases, for example, I have 50 lakh cases. So only as many doses will be spared for that much period. So it is not a huge difference, but it is certainly spares a small number of doses at any time.
So I would be correct in understanding that the current supply and stock of vaccinations is also a factor in making these recommendations?
This particular recommendation is vaccine sparing, when we are saying, is certainly will help to a very small extent, but certainly help to take care of the vaccine shortage currently. But okay, in the long run, it has its immunological advantages also.
Okay. Professor Gupta, may I ask you to please come in on this question? And I must explain the context of, what people are wondering what's going on. So the CDC, for example, says that you should wait 4 to 6 weeks after you test COVID-19 positive to get a vaccination. We've had that number at 14 days so far. Now we're talking about possibly increasing it to 6 months or up to 9 months. So is there science behind this? Is there enough scientific evidence to support this? Or are we also looking at it from the point of view that at least let a larger number of people get basic immunity? Because those who have suffered COVID-19 have some immunity, at least for an extended period of time.
I think Professor Arora has explained so beautifully that once a person gets COVID-19 and he has antibody in it, which itself acts as a prophylactic preventive for him for a certain duration of time. We have found that this period is much, much beyond 14 days. It may be 3 months, maybe 6 months, and if the data says maybe beyond that. This decision is absolutely science-based, and final decision is yet to be taken. This is absolutely what is called as a vaccine sparing. It does not mean that there is a shortage of vaccine. Had shortage been the reason, because ultimately we will be making all the vaccines available to us. Good number of vaccines will be available to us in next 3 months. And in next 6 months, we expect that a much boost in the production of the vaccine. The vaccine production is now being technology transformed from Bharat Biotech. Department of Biotechnology is funding at least few organizations like Bharat Biotech is doubling its production to 10 crore units. Hopkins Biopharmaceuticals is making 2 crore units maybe after 3 months. Indian Immunological Limited has been given grant to increase the production. Bibcol, which is Bharat Immunologicals and Biologicals Limited. So this total production, if I just summarize that, will be good enough, including the increased production by Covishield and coupled with the import from Sputnik and also the production by other units, which are other type of vaccine which will coming up. So vaccine shortage is not the real issue. It is optimization of the available vaccine, and a country like this where the requirement is large without compromising the immunity in the human being. That is what the strategy, and that is what is the science-based. And that is what, when we look for, we not only look for the data produced or generated within India, but we also look for the data which is generated in UK or maybe other countries. And that is why we take a consolidated viewpoint, and which is absolutely science-driven. And it will be unfair to say that this decision is based on that we do not have enough sufficient vaccine. But that is primarily science-driven. And if I also say that the increase from what initially was a 6 to 8 week, then we increased to 12 to 16 week, was also based on the data which primarily came from the UK. And then we found that there is a much larger, better protection if this gap is increased for 12 weeks to 16 weeks. And that is the total science-driven. It is so as the science progresses, as the data generate, it is a dynamic process. And we did not know earlier. So now we know, and therefore this is the totally science-based decision which is taken up.
Professor Gupta, just follow up to that. You talked about how we're basing some of these decisions or some of these recommendations on the basis of data from all around the world, including UK. And you gave the UK example for the gap for Covishield. Now, UK on its part, a few days ago, has reduced the gap from 12 weeks to 8 weeks between the two doses of AstraZeneca on which Covishield is based. And they have cited the 0.167 variant as one of the reasons, which is also prevalent here. So
I think
how would you fit that into what we have, just seen?
I think this is important to understand the philosophy and science behind this, and also the management aspect. The UK realized that there are more clusters of patients who have B.1.617, which is perhaps the variant which is now coming from India, what they say. And now the strategy is that how fast they can immunize the entire country with a reasonable amount of antibody. It is not that they do not agree that their data was wrong. The data still is that if the waiting time, if the gap is between 12 and 16 weeks, the response or the performance will be better. However, the faster coverage, to improve the faster coverage, and that's why strategically this period has been reduced. So science is there, and this is again in an attempt to do it to more than 50 years and more vulnerable population to cover them faster, and therefore the time has been reduced to 8 weeks. It is not that there is a difference in the science between 12 to 16 weeks and the difference in the science between 8 weeks strategy.
Okay, one more point that I want to ask, let me come to Dr. Arora here, is now ICMR has now dropped the need for plasma in its list of recommendations to clinicians. This is an important point for people to understand, because we have seen at the height of the second wave, at least in Delhi and in other places, there were desperate pleas for plasma donors to come forward. Now the ICMR says that that is not required. Why this fluctuation in what the SOP is to treat COVID-19 even so many months later? If plasma does not help, then why was it being recommended by doctors, and families had to run around looking for donors?
So, first of all, I will just continue with where Professor Y.K Gupta finished. And I think that the decisions being taken for the national program are driven by group technical people taking Indian context into account. And I must assure you, we do not follow blindly any other country's decisions. And that was the reason that in January, when decision was made and there was immense pressure, we continued with 4-week interval for Covishield. We revisited and we made it 6 to 8 weeks. And now we have on the ground data, so we made it 12 to 16 weeks. So I think that is an important dimension to be considered. And coming to the next question, because the two are linked, the plasma. Now, plasma, when initially trial was done by ICMR, it did not show any positive benefit, either those who were given plasma or not plasma, in terms of either duration of hospitalization or in terms of outcome, that is mortality. And it was being given mostly for moderate to severe, because that is what it is. Now, over last 4 to 6 months, something very interesting has happened. And many of us, the moment I will recall and you will remember, Trump became okay within few days after he contracted the illness, because he was given a cocktail of antibodies. And this same cocktail of antibodies is now available in India. This cocktail of antibodies is effective only when it is given early in the disease, because it neutralizes the virus. While if I give plasma in the second week, when the virus is no more a problem, but it is the body's own immune response which is hitting the body, becomes the dominant thing, at that time antibodies are ineffective or less effective. So therefore, it is during last 6-7 months, clinicians looked at this data and then this antibody has come. So today, if there is a person who is at high risk of developing severe disease, for example, elderly person with severe and diabetes or uncontrolled heart disease or liver disease, if that person is given plasma or cocktail of antibodies right on the 3rd, 4th or 5th day, the outcome is likely to be better. And that is what is the indicator for that CIPLA, which has now imported the drug. So it's a dynamic field, and we have to understand that this disease is just 15 or 16-month old. And we are learning the clinical management, the science behind various issues. The fact of the matter is that for this virus, we do not have a very specific antiviral agent. Whatever is being tried is all hit and trial. Nothing has really shown effectiveness. We know remdesivir is being used all over the country, but WHO has said that it is of very little use, but Indian clinicians feel it might be of help. So I think we should, whenever these decisions are being made, a lot of thought process is going on, and science is the driving factor on that day. And that is the reason that plasma has been withdrawn, because it was being given during the seriousness when hospital patients are hospitalized, and it is of very little value at that time. And the patient and their attendants were our left and right. देखिए हमने तो plasma भी करवाया, उसके बाद भी नहीं बचा patient. The reason is that it would not work at that time, and that's what the study was showing. Yeah. I will stop at that.
You know, I think the important takeaway that it's a fluid situation. It's a relatively new disease that everyone is grappling with. In that context, Professor Gupta, one last question, an important one, because under recommendation and under consideration is also vaccination for pregnant women and lactating mothers. There is no clear direction on that in India, at least so far. So will we be expecting any clarity on that in the next few days, and what are your views on this? What is the committee looking at?
Certainly. I think this is an issue. When we say of any drug or any vaccine, we have to look for the risk-benefit assessment. And the safety of a vaccine or safety of a drug in lactating and pregnant women is very difficult to assess, and later part of that. And it's not that they may not suffer. If a pregnant woman will have COVID, this will suffer, and the baby may also suffer. Therefore, a very scientific-based decision is to be taken that what should be the policy, and this decision will be taken. But I will just mention one thing here to you, that today the indiscriminate use of antibiotics during the COVID, everybody is using some or the other high-end antibiotics. So we are fighting on one hand the COVID-19 pandemic, but at the same time we are also sitting on a volcanic or silent antimicrobial resistance pandemic. And therefore, what Professor Arora has emphasized, that each decision has to be science-based, rational. And as on now, there is no established or certainty of antiviral drug, and therefore not all cocktail of antibiotics should be given, which you are seeing, the mucormycosis or black fungus, which is all sort of these type of things complication will arise. So we have to be careful, we have to be patient, and we need to be based on science.
Okay. I want to thank both of you, Dr. Arora, Professor Gupta, for joining us on the show today, answering all our questions, and I hope our viewers have benefited. Remember, these are the gentlemen, and they sit in committees which actually decide the policy for COVID-19 in this country, and they've given the time to answer all of our questions. So we thank you for that.
Thank you.